This is an overview of the Rangecast player. This is meant as a fairly high-level overview describing what the different sections of the player are and the basic options without going into much details. There will be quite a few places where I'll describe that something can be done, but not necessarily go into enough detail for you to necessarily see how it's done. Also, the player here is in an advanced mode. That's available on most user accounts, but may not be in some situations. So some of the screens or options shown may not be available from another user account. In the Rangecast player, there are three main display areas. At the top is a section that shows information about the current transmission and also has the main control panels for controlling, like pausing and playing content and choosing the selection mode for the audio, the volume control, things like that. In the lower left is a channels panel, which is used to control which channels will be received. And in the lower right is a transmissions panel that reports information about current, recently played, and pending transmissions, giving some details about those so you can see the context of what you're hearing beyond the individual information about the current transmission that's most prominent in the upper display. So we'll walk through each of these sections and discuss what they do in some more detail. In the Rangecast player, in the lower left are the playing control buttons. All of the icons have mouse over text, so you can see a description of what they are by hovering over them. In addition, for the controls, the active controls showing a current mode of operation are in white, while other options are shown in black. We have in this section, we have a play and a pause button. Those would have the expected effect. You can pause the audio, and then when you want, you can resume the audio. Because Rangecast buffers content, this makes it possible to walk away, do something else while it's paused, come back and resume, and not miss anything. Next to that is a skip button, which immediately ends reception of the current transmission, and the player moves on to the next content. Next to that is a replay or repeat button that at the end of the current playback will then play once again the same audio, so you can catch an address or something like that. If you were to push that button twice, it goes into a loop mode where it will continue playing that audio continuously until you press, again, it's now shown as an X for a cancel action, until you end the looping behavior. Then it will resume normal playback. If you want to hold on the current single channel, you can push the finger button here, which is for holding on a channel. When you do that, the player will immediately disregard all other channels and play just that one that you're seeing. Next to that, the circle with a line through it is for blocking a channel. This is exactly the same as turning that channel off. So if you hear content that you don't want to receive, you can press this to block the channel so it will not be played for you. This is not a permanent action. When you come back to the player later, it will be there again. It's just operative while the player is open. And finally, the last control in this block is a forward-reverse selection. You press this button, you change the direction of playback, and so you can start playing transmissions in reverse order, for instance, seeing how an event unfolded, and you can resume back to the forward direction to play forward. To the right, we have some time controls here. This shows what time of day the content is being played from. So presently it's 4:18 p.m. and there is a slider here that lets you move to a different point in time. By default, the time slider moves over a 1-hour range from the start to finish. It's possible to also switch that into a 24-hour mode. When you move the slider, the time that you will move to is shown in the date and time entry fields over here. So if I were to go backwards from 4:18, I could move back to, say, approximately 3:45, and then when I release the mouse there, now the player will start playing content from 3:45 p.m. going forward. If I were to click on this control here between 1 and 24, this now moves to a 24-hour slider, and now if I move back in time, I can, for instance, go to approximately 6 a.m. this morning, and the player will move to that time and start playing content that was recorded several hours ago. The black skip to now button on the far right will bring you back to the current time. And that's a way to come back if you've gone back exploring in the past, to come back to the current. At all times, that will skip all transmissions and will then only be responsive to new transmissions that start coming in.
Control 3 William 21. Can you log a plate, please?
The other control in this row here is a minimum duration filter. By default, it's set to 0, which means that all transmissions play. But if you want to reject short transmissions, you can move this down to, say, 5 seconds, and now nothing will play unless the transmission is at least 5 seconds in length. That can be useful for decluttering if you're in a situation where there's a lot of chatter that's not so important to you of the OK acknowledgement variety. That will just make that content go away. You'll just hear the longer content. That's normally left at 0. Clicking on the main screen area also acts as a hold, same as pressing the hold button in the lower left, and pressing again will release that hold. On the top bar, we have a set of controls that governs the screen, what kind of display you are seeing, how it's formatted, what information is shown. The next block of controls is a selection mode for deciding how transmissions are selected for playback. The volume control with a mute button that's available. And finally, a preferences options panel for more advanced settings in other informational resources. So stepping through these controls in more detail, we'll first look at the ones that control the selection mode. The leftmost option that shows a radio symbol is called monitoring mode. As before, all of the options, all of the icons here have explanatory text when mousing over them. Monitor mode attempts to keep the player close to real time. Rangecast buffers audio, so if multiple transmissions are on the air simultaneously, they will all be recorded and then presented in the player one after the other. This, however, means if you are listening to a very large system with a lot of radio content and everything is being played, you can start falling back in time if the amount of content that's being recorded exceeds 1-to-1 to real time. So if over an hour you're recording over an hour of content, you'll find that you may have fallen back in time half an hour from real time by the time you get past an hour. That's a problem if you want to be monitoring current events, and so monitor mode is available as a way that the player will try to intelligently skip less important content in order to stay close to real time and not fall back. The camera symbol is used for snapshot mode, which is an option that will freeze a block of transmissions in time instead of the normal situation where transmissions are churning. New ones are coming onto the list all the time, old ones are falling off. Snapshot lets you define a beginning and ending time and get a frozen list of that specific content that you can scroll through visually, see what the transmissions were, or play, without having the interference of new content coming in. On the far right, I'm taking these in rough order of importance here, is the history mode, which is useful especially for going back in time and listening to prior events. Monitoring mode is locked to current time, so you wind up in history mode if you go back in time. History mode also never skips content, unless you've specifically said so. Like if you said to turn a channel off, it won't play. If you have a minimum duration filter set to 5 seconds, 2-second transmissions won't play. But in history mode, the player attempts to play everything that's eligible to be received. Nothing is skipped in order to stay current. Therefore, if the player is left in history mode after you've gone back in time, come back to the current time, you may find yourself starting to fall back in time. If you see that, you can switch to monitoring mode and that'll fix the issue. Adjacent to history mode is a reverse history mode. This will play transmissions in reverse order instead of in forward order. And then there are two other options up here that are of less importance to know about. There is a leading edge mode that prevents buffering. It will only play transmissions as they come in. If two transmissions come in simultaneously, only one will be played. But this makes sure that what is played is only leading edge traffic just as it's received. And there's a replay sequence mode that will play in reverse order the transmissions you have just heard, however they were selected. And that's useful potentially if you hear something happen on the scanner, you want to find out what it was, but you don't know what channel it was, you don't know when it was. That will just be like a replay, but going back more than the current transmission. It'll go back as many transmissions as you need until you find the content you're looking for. Some of these controls are interactive in various ways. For example, you'll see we're in monitoring mode up here, but if I take the slider and I go back in time any distance at all, and I release that, I'm no longer even trying to be current. I'm now trying to listen to 6 a.m. and it's now 4 p.m. So by definition, that's not monitoring mode anymore. You're no longer at the current time. So when you use the time slider, whenever you use the time slider, the player will automatically switch into history mode, where it skips nothing and plays all the traffic. That's important to know because it means that you have left the current real-time mode. Even if you bring this back close to real time, you're still going to be in the history mode and you have potential of falling back in time. In order to release that, if you want to go back to the normal condition, and you can do this from wherever you are in time, if you want to go back to listening to current content, just click the monitor button, and you'll instantly be back in the mode that plays only current content.
We're all good for.
The catch-up to real-time skip everything button has a similar effect, with one important proviso. Some accounts are set up so that when they launch, they'll launch into monitoring mode. That's important for real-time content. But some accounts have been set by the user to launch into history mode, and that's preferred if you're in a use case where you want to be sure you hear everything even if you fall back in time. That's a user choice, which mode it will launch into. And the skip to now button here will take you to the current time and put you into the mode that is the normal mode you chose to launch into when you start the player. So the exact behavior of that button will be different for different users, but the basic idea is always the same. Get to the current time, make the player behave the way it would if you launched it, have everything back to normal. There's also an interaction with the reverse button. If you go in reverse, by definition, you're not going forward in time and staying close to real time, you're going backwards. And so when you go into reverse mode, the player mode will switch to a reverse history, as shown up here. Then if you click forward again, it'll put you in forward history. Once again, you've left monitoring mode because you've left the automatic selection of real-time content and chosen to go into a hear everything state. And that's generally the preferred behavior, because if you're doing that, it's because you hear an event you want to know about, you're paying attention to it, you want to make sure you get all the content, and it's important for you to stay at the event you're trying to study instead of getting yanked back to the current time. That's why you're left in a history mode, whether forward or reverse, when you start using the time controls. Monitoring mode can fall back in time by up to 5 minutes. The thinking there is that transmissions on Rangecast are split into segments of, at maximum, 2 minutes each. If you happen to have two very long transmissions that come in at the same time, and you hear both of them, you might wind up falling back in time 4 minutes. So we figured that 4 to 5 minutes should be allowed under all circumstances. So if you're in a low-traffic environment, even if a couple of things come in at once, you're not going to miss anything. However, if 5 minutes is too far back in time for your use case, there are options in here for reducing that and not allowing the player to fall back in time by that much. In general, if you're dealing with a very busy system, the player will usually be at the maximum fallback because more is coming in that can be played, and it falls back that far and then says, yep, time to start skipping things in order to stay close to real time. On the other hand, if you're in a low-traffic environment, there's enough time to play everything. So usually everything in queue will play, even if a few things are on the air at once and they're played in sequence. Everything will play and clear, and then it'll be up to current time, waiting for the next transmission to come in to play immediately. The next block of controls is a display group over here. These control what is shown on the screen. We're currently in desktop mode, which is the normal mode, and it has all three of these panels on the screen at once. However, it is possible to switch to other display states. For example, these next two options show the channels panel in two different varieties. We have a channel grid that shows all of the channels in this format. We'll discuss this in more detail when we discuss the channels panel. And also a list format that lists out the channels. There's a transmissions panel page option, which shows just the transmissions list without the channel list. And the intention here is that these can be used on mobile devices so that you normally have the desktop area, but if you need to focus on one part of a screen and your display area is not large enough to show the entire desktop, very common for mobile devices, you'll usually find the player will start in one of these other modes, like this grid mode. And if you need to see a different part of the screen for the actions you want to do, you can tap on these controls up here, which are always available, to move between different parts of the player. Normal desktop mode has it all, but you have the option of, on mobile devices, of you looking only one area at a time, or on desktop, if you just like one of these modes, you're entirely welcome to use them, and they have some situations where they're beneficial. The diamond symbol on the right is a really minimal player that just shows the current transmission information, the most basic controls, and leaves off all of those other panels. So this is good if you want to minimize the player and put it in the corner of your screen, or if you're working on a small mobile device, or if you just like a really clean, elegant display that doesn't have a lot of things going on it. The basic display here is available for you.
I'm going to be out with 3/21 at 172 Judy Lane.
On mobile devices, the player will automatically adjust the screen in various ways to try to fit to your display size. You may find that some controls are not available on smaller mobile devices as the player tries to automatically adapt to the size of your display. Moving on to the next region, we'll look at the channels panel over here. And most important is this is available in two forms. This is called the grid mode, as shown by this grid layout symbol here. There's also a list mode. In either state, what you have available to you is a list of channels, where every channel available to you on the system is shown on one either row in the case of the list, or one cell with less information on the grid format. When you're on the grid format, you can hover over any of the channels and you'll get a description of what that channel is. On the list format, that's entirely spelled out. You get here the name of the channel, what frequency it's on, and on the left you have a symbol indicating whether the channel is being scanned, whether it's off, if it's in some priority mode, and also a letter code that's used to identify the kind of a channel that you're dealing with. For instance, P are police channels, F are fire channels, I is interoperations, W is public works, etc. So that's kind of an indicator for how the channel is classified. You can click on these here, like I can turn channels off by clicking on them, or if a channel is off, I can turn it on. And I'm clicking here on the symbol on the left, the on-off symbol when I do that. Likewise, on the grid, you can click on the channel itself to turn them on and off. There are also more advanced options available in here for selecting groups of channels and working with them. For example, if I wanted to turn off the entire Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation group, I could click on that field, which will highlight all the channels that have that property. And realize this is crossing panels over here, but you can go over here and click off, and now they're all turned off. In general, these two panels are somewhat interactive. The channels panel has the simpler controls that are always useful there, including on grid mode where you can't do complicated marking operations, while on the transmissions panel you can always do somewhat more, and that's where the controls are for acting on marked groups of channels. Other things you can do on the channels panel over here is you can turn all the channels on and off with these two controls. So I can turn everything off, and then I can start turning on some channels if I want. Maybe I choose things that aren't very active and I do that randomly. Or I can click there to turn them all on. Also, if you're in a situation where, let's go back to a list mode here and find some activity, like we'll take this, we're currently listening to a mix of content from Nevada and Massachusetts, but I'll take this Nevada content, I've turned it all on, and I've turned off all that Massachusetts content. So when I come back here, you see that I have a lot of channels turned off and a bunch of channels turned on. When, let's say you want to listen to an event, you go through, you get the list of channels with just the ones you want on. You can then click this trim button, the scissors, and that will trim out of what you're seeing all the channels that are turned off. Just instantly clean up your display to just the things you want to see.
Control 3, William 90.
And the reset control here will restore this channel list to the way it was when you started.
Volkswagen Mass 1 Whiskey Charlie.
In the list box, you can type in keywords and get matches for that. So I could put in here, for instance, Vegas, and push the Enter key. And now the channels that have the word Vegas in them are highlighted, marked, I might say. And then I can do things with the marked channels. The symbol over here goes to a checkbox to show that those have been marked. And for anything you have marked, this block of controls here can be used as actions on them. Note on the transmissions panel you have the exact same list over here for turning everything on, off, trimming, and reset. And then you have these additional controls for actions on groups of channels. Reviewing what these controls are, we have a Mark All and a Clear All Marks. This one here is a focus button. If you press this is what I used earlier as I was going through kind of quickly. What this will do is it will take all the channels that are marked and turn them on. It will take everything that's not marked and turn it off. So in this case, when I click that, now I've got this Vegas content on and everything else is off. So that's a quick way to focus on specific content. So I can take the channels list, and let's say I wanted to hear about the Henderson Police and Henderson Fire and nothing else. The very quick thing I could do is I can click on where it says Henderson Police and Henderson Fire. Now I've marked that content and everything else is unmarked. And now I can click Focus over here. And now I have a player that's just listening to those channels. Everything else is off. If I want to clean it up, I can then press Trim. And now that takes all of the channels I've left off, and they're no longer even on the player. And as before, if I want to come back to where I was, I can push the reset button. I have it all back. It's all turned on again. The last option over here, Remove, that will take the marked channels and it will not just turn them off, it'll also take them off the display, so they're not even showing. But as before, I can always come back with Reset back to the way things were. So Delete is not a permanent action, or Remove. It just takes them off the screen at the current time.
255, you received the 29.
Coming back to the channels panel, we have an important control here called Views. In normal conditions, the player will be playing all channels. Every channel that's known on the system will appear on a row, or if you're in grid format, will appear as a grid cell. But you may not want to listen to everything, and there are prepackaged views that are available automatically. For example, I'm currently listening to a mix of Massachusetts content and Nevada content. And if I wanted to, for instance, listen to just the content from Nye County, Nevada, I could take this and drop down here. Now I've got just the Nye County channels shown. Or I could, and that's all that'll play when that's what shows. Or I could switch to Clark County, and now I've got the Clark County channels. And everything else isn't even there. So these allow for focused actions where you're focused on listening to one part of the system. And in addition to the county-based forms, you can also have, there's a few automatic options in here that will group content, for instance, by agency. So now all the fire traffic is on a button, etc. Or by group, which will take all of the content from specific groups of channels and combine them together onto a single button automatically. Those are easier to understand in the list format than the grid format. And in grid format, it just shows the agency's code. But in list format, it gives you the name of what those are. And then these can be turned on and off as if they were channels. So it makes for a somewhat simpler interface, but without the resolution of going down to the channel level on individual content. It's also possible to create views and save them for future use. So if you define channels of interest to a particular bureau or to a particular market or something like that, you can put those together and save it as a view so that you have that available for you in the future. There's also a create custom filter option you can use on the fly. And what you can do here is you can specify what you want to have in your player. So let's say I want to have the Clark and Nye will do a multi-select by going down to the second one and doing a control enter, I think, or shift enter, I guess it is. How does that work? There we are. Control enter to mark two items. Now when I click outside this box, I can now go down here and let's say I want to focus on just the fire content, so I can do the same thing there. Now when I press Apply Filter, now I have a player that has just the fire content from those two counties. So if you can define what you want on the fly using this interface, you can specify by county, by city, by what group of channels it is within the channel database, by function type of what kind of content it is. If you can select it out that way, you can instantly make yourself a view that is focused on just the section that you want. City information is not always available in the player. It's not part of our nationwide channel database, but it's information we can annotate into it as certain sections of the country are in use. So if that's not marked in your region, that's always something that can be added to make the city information available. So we'll come over to the transmissions panel now. And what we have here is a list of transmissions that have played recently or are in queue to play. When you're listening in close real time in a monitoring mode, you may have a situation where some content is queued, that's what's shown in green, and some is already played in gray, kind of mixed together. That's because sometimes a transmission only becomes available to the player some seconds after it was recorded, and depending on the difference in latency between different locations, you might have a situation where the content plays out of order, but whatever is available plays in the order that in the broadcast order for the transmissions that are known, and something that was earlier that comes in later will be played as soon as it's available. We have here the times of the transmissions and what channel they're on, and these are all clickable regions. If the time column is used as a direct time control, so let's say I really wanted to hear this transmission down here, I click on the time, and now it goes back and plays that transmission right away. So you can use this here as a way of instantly jumping to any of the transmissions on the list by clicking directly on the time. The channel information, this hierarchical information at 3 levels, is used just as it was on the channels panel. I can click here to mark content. So I can click on Las Vegas Fire, and now all the Las Vegas Fire channels are marked. And you can see that happen over on the channels list over here. Those are all marked now because they have the name Las Vegas Fire in that field. And in addition, they're marked on the transmissions list when I have those channels as well, so that you can see what you're acting on as you do things. And that can be used up here for these controls. Oh, I got as far as focus, but I didn't explain some of these other ones here. Most channels are in a medium priority, a normal scan mode under most circumstances. You also have the option of putting channels into a high or low priority state. This only matters if you're in monitoring mode, where it's intelligently choosing what to play and trying to stay close to real time. In history mode, any on-channel, no matter the priority level, plays, and they all play in the order that the transmissions occurred. There's no importance to what level of priority it is if you're in history. But in monitoring mode, this is a useful ability. If you make certain channels be marked as high priority, they'll switch to a blue color here, and now any transmissions on those channels will be preferentially played immediately when they arrive. Whereas normally they may buffer content and you may find that you're sitting back in time a few minutes. Any priority channel will play traffic immediately when the content is available. Low priority is the first to be skipped, so if it has to skip something to stay close to real time, it'll skip any traffic on the low priority channels first, which means you don't have to worry about guessing how busy systems will be as you're setting up your player. You can list everything you want, put the things that are of least importance to you at low priority, and then if you're at a quiet time and there's time to play that content, it will. If it gets busy, it'll drop that content and focus on the things that are more important to your mission. Inside the transmissions panel, you'll notice that some of these lines are bolded. Those are on the same channel that is currently playing, so that you can visually look at the screen when something is playing and see how much activity there was around this event or around this communication by seeing where the other transmissions were in that sequence. And again, the ones that are coming up and pending to play are the ones in green. This bar here with the blinky lights is a visual illustration of what's going on in the 5-minute window around real time and going back 5 minutes. If there's activity in anywhere in that time range, you can see 443 to 448 here is showing at the moment. That's illustrated in these squares. So what's currently playing is shown in this yellow color. Time intervals where there was nothing coming in are in black, and pending transmissions are in green, etc. You can hover over any of these squares and you get a description of what that content is that's inside that period, what transmission or transmissions were in that time cell. So you can visually see what's going on by moving the mouse back and forth across that period. At the moment, since we have the Las Vegas fire traffic in a priority mode, we occasionally see the time of the current transmission jump forward when it has a Las Vegas transmission, and then drop back in time by a couple of minutes when it's back to going through the usual queued content that's waiting to play. On the right are some options relating to text transcription. One of the features of Rangecast is the ability to transcribe and analyze the text representation of the audio and the audio files. This is definitely far from a perfect technology for being actual transcription, but it is actually quite effective for keyword matching. If there are words that indicate an event of interest to you, it's possible to detect that those words are in a transmission, even if it doesn't show up in the literal transcription of "here's our best guess." You know, like you may have two words that are similar to each other, maybe it gets it wrong on the transcription, but it can tell that the keyword has a good chance of having been in there. And the software that is outside the player, the Rangecast system has the ability of sending out an alert notification by email or text message when a keyword detection is noted to alert you to that situation. Since it is doing the transcription in those particular channels, this is only active in specific markets, but where it's in use, it's possible to see that text information in the player. So right now, on the channels we're looking at, the Las Vegas content is being transcribed, the Massachusetts content is not. There are several controls over here for working with text in the player. The simplest one is on the T symbol, which shows text. So now we see on the transmissions that have been transcribed, which is in this case just the Las Vegas content. We're also only transcribing the longer transmissions, more likely to have descriptive information. We see that text presented along with the transmission. If we click the little A with a plus symbol, that will focus only on the transcribed content. So now we're seeing a list of the transmissions that were transcribed, but we're not seeing anything else. The symbol over here, the A with the underline, shows just the text. And this is useful especially if you want to use the transmissions panel as kind of another window into what's going on in your community. If you let this run over here, now you're listening to content, and in addition to hearing things, you can visually scan the transmissions panel and see if there's any event that sounds like it's of interest to you. Again, the transcriptions are far from imperfect, so this is not meant as a literal, here is definitely what was said, meaning, but you can generally get a gist of what's going on, or if there's an event of importance, you can get a general idea that it's something you want to investigate and learn more about. And so when that happens, you can click on any one of the transmissions shown here. That will immediately be brought into playback. So you can jump to any of the transcriptions that have been transcribed and see what they are. Keyword matching looks for particular kinds of patterns in the audio, and these are relatively rare. The idea here isn't to hit a lot of traffic, but to hit more major events, and so that outbound notifications can be made, like to a cell phone. And if you click the equal symbol, you get only the transmissions that match keywords. And so in this case, over the past few hours, we've only got these 3 transmissions that match, and there's descriptive information in bold of what was viewed as possibly matching to relevance in those transmissions. So coming back to just ordinary real-time with the player, we can look at some of the other options that are available. The options outside of the main player are all concentrated onto an options page, and the depth of these options depends on the kind of account you have. We're currently in advanced mode. There's also a beginner and intermediate mode, and intermediate is essentially the same as advanced, except that most of the options are left off. It's a smaller set of options to understand. And beginner, it locks the display to one of the simpler display modes. It doesn't have all 3 panels, no transmissions panel, things like that. The display theme, these are a bunch of color themes that are available for the player. You can browse that and choose color sets that you like. These colors are still being refined in some places. Sometimes it's hard to see one thing over a different thing on certain monitors. So we're finding places where those can be improved, but these are these are generally quite effective and have very different impressions, and so you can work with the player as you like to show it as you like it. Other options down here are less important, but just generally reviewing them. Auto coloring of the player lets you have the text up here show in accordance with the type of transmission it is, instead of just always being in one color of text. On launch, there are a few predefined packages for the options, and you can have the player launch into one of those, like one that leaves it always starting up in history mode and does other configuration settings as a block. I like leaving it in restore from last session. That doesn't restore the list of channels and what you're receiving and all of that to exactly the way it was. This is only about controlling these options, but it if you want it to start up in a consistent way and one of the other options works for you, that's something that can be done. And down here we have some controls for what content is being received. You can use the Rangecast player to listen to content from anywhere in the nation if your account has been given access permission to the particular content you want to receive. So right now we're listening to a combination of content from Las Vegas and a system called Traffic in Massachusetts.
On Arroyo Grande with an unregistered green moped.
So let's bring the player back, just for consistency, back to the original display color theme we were seeing. And also worthy of note is that the channel list is easier to work with if it's the only thing on the screen, because there's a lot of information on here and it gives it more screen real estate to work with. So even though the channel list is available on the main desktop mode, you may find it easier to see on this page. In addition, if you click the tool icon on the right, you get some additional columns, give you technical information about what's being received, and that might be of interest to some people to have access to that and see it, but it's generally not that important. You can also use this page to work on creating players that are configured in certain ways, have buttons arranged in certain ways, save that so you can come back to it later, but that's beyond the scope of this overview video. And finally, on the main display, this is only in advanced mode. There's a number on the right here that shows what's called the load. That's the ratio of real time against the amount of traffic that's being received on the channels you have selected. So right now, for instance, at 110%, there's a little more traffic coming in that can actually be listened to if you listen to everything. And as you change which channels are active, that number can change. And so that's a way of keeping track of how busy the system is at given times.
I'll be in the parking lot of Walmart next to the Chase driveway.
And that completes an overview of the Rangecast player.